So, in contrast to the examination of the darker side of humanity that we're doing as we walk through part three of the Green Mile, Coffey's Hands, and we're examining the dangerousness of Percy Wetmore. And while we were working, I figured I'd continue to read in the sunlight, since we're looking at such dark characters and the darkness peering into the darkness of their souls. Just a reminder that as you're listening, in addition to making sure that you're getting the information you need for the questions that you need to answer, that you're also keeping track of information that you need in order to write your essay, that you're gathering the evidence that you need as you decide which person is more dangerous, Percy Wetmore or Wild Bill Wharton. And with that said, we will continue on our journey through the world of Stephen King in The Green Mile, Part 3, Coffey's Hands, Chapter 6. That was the week Melinda Moores, the warden's wife, came home from Indianola. The doctors were done with her. They had had their interesting, newfangled x-ray photographs of the tumor in her head. They had documented the weaknesses in her hand and the paralyzing pains that racked her almost constantly by then, and were done with her. They gave her husband a bunch of pills with morphine in them and sent Melinda home to die. Hal Morris had some sick leave piled up. Not a lot. They didn't give you a lot in those days. But he took what he had so he could help her do what she had to do. My wife and I went to see her 3 days or so after she came home. I called ahead and Hal said yes, that would be fine. Melinda was having a plenty good day and would enjoy seeing us. I hate calls like this, I said to Janice as we drove to the little house where the Morrises had spent most of their marriage. So does everyone, honey, she said, and patted my hand. We'll bear up under it, and so will she. I hope so. We found Melinda in the sitting room, planted in a bright slant of unseasonably warm October sun. My first shock thought was that she had lost 90 pounds. She hadn't, of course. If she lost that much weight, she hardly would have been there at all. But that was my brain's initial reaction to what my eyes were reporting. Her face had fallen away to show the shape of her underlying skull, and her skin was as white as parchment. There were dark circles under her eyes, and it was the first time I ever saw her in a rocker when she didn't have a lap full of sewing or Afghan squares or rags for braiding into a rug. She was just sitting there, like a person in a train station. Melinda, my wife said warmly. I think she was shocked as I was, more perhaps, but she hid it splendidly, as some women seem able to do. She went to Melinda, dropped to one knee beside the rocking chair in which the warden's wife sat, and took one of her hands. As she did, my eye happened on the blue heart rug by the fire. It occurred to me that it should have been the shade of tired old limes, because now this room was another version of the Green Mile. I brought you some tea, Jan said. The kind I put up myself. It's a nice sleepy tea. I've left it in the kitchen. Thank you so much, darling, Melinda said. Her voice sounded old and rusty. How you feeling, dear? My wife asked. Better, Melinda said in a rusty, grating voice. Not so as I want to go out to a barn dance, but at least there's no pain today. They gave me some pills for the headaches. Sometimes they even work. That's good, isn't it? But I can't grip so well. Something's happened to my hand. She raised it, looked at it as if she had never seen it before, then lowered it back into her lap. Something's happened all over me. She began to cry in a soundless way that made me think of John Coffey. It started to chime in my head again, that thing he'd said. I helped it, didn't I? I helped it, didn't I? Like a rhyme you can't get rid of. Hal came in then. He collared me, and you can believe me when I say I was glad to be collared. He went into the kitchen, and he poured me half a shot of white whiskey, hot stuff fresh out of some countryman's still. We clinked our glasses together and drank. The shine went down like coal oil. The bloom in the belly was heavy. Still, when Morris tipped the mason jar at me, wordlessly asking if I wanted the other half, I shook my head and waved it off. Wild Bill Wharton was out of restraints for the time being anyway, and it wouldn't be safe to go near where he was with a booze-clouded head, not even with bars between us. I don't know how long I could take this, Paul, he said in a low voice. There's a girl who comes in mornings to help me with her, but the doctor says she may lose control of her bowels, and he stopped, his throat working, trying hard not to cry in front of me again. Go with it as best you can, I said. I reached out across the table and briefly squeezed his palsied, liver-spotted hand. Do that day by day and give the rest over to God. There's nothing else you can do, is there? I guess not. But it's hard, Paul. I pray you never have to find out how hard. He made an effort to collect himself. Now, tell me the news. How you doing with William Wharton? And how are you making out with Percy Wetmore? We talked shop for a while and got through the visit. After, all the way home, with my wife silent for the most part, wet-eyed and thoughtful, in the passenger seat beside me, Coffey's words ran around in my head like Mr. Jingles running around in Delacroix cell. I helped it, didn't I? It's terrible, my wife said dully at one point, and there's nothing anyone can do to help her. I nodded agreement and thought, I helped it, didn't I? But that was crazy, and I tried as best I could to put it out of my mind. As we turned into our dooryard, she finally spoke a second time, not about our old friend Melinda, but about my urinary infection. She wanted to know if it was really gone. Really gone, I told her. That's fine then, she said, and kissed me over the eyebrow in that shivery place of mine. Maybe we ought to, get up to a little something, if we have the time and the inclination, that is. Having plenty of the latter and just enough of the former, I took her by the hand and led her into the back bedroom and took her clothes off as she stroked the part of me that swelled and throbbed, but didn't hurt anymore. And as I moved in her sweetness, slipping through it in that slow way she liked, that we both liked, I thought of John Coffey saying he'd helped it. He'd helped it, hadn't he? Like a snatch of song that wouldn't leave your mind until it's damn good and ready. Later, as I drove to the prison, I got to thinking that very soon we would have to start rehearsing for Delacroix's execution. That thought led to how Percy was going to be out front this time. I felt a shiver of dread. I told myself to just go with it. One execution, and we'd very likely be shut of Percy Wetmore for good. But still, I felt that shiver, as if the affection I'd been suffering with wasn't gone at all, but it only switched locations, from boiling my groin to freezing my backbone. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. Come on, Brutal told Delacroix the following evening. We're going for a little walk. You and me and Mr. Jingles. Delacroix looked at him distrustfully, then reached down to the cigar box for the mouse. He cupped it in the palm of one hand and looked at Brutal with narrowed eyes. What you talking about? He asked. It's a big night for you and Mr. Jingles, Dean said, as he and Harry joined Brutal. The chain of bruises around Dean's neck had got an unpleasant yellow color, but at least he could talk again without sounding like a dog barking at a cat. He looked at Brutal. Think you ought to put the shackles on him, Brutal? Brutal appeared to consider. Nah, he said at last. He's going to be good, ain't you, Del? You and the mouse both. After all, you're going to be showing off for some high muckamucks tonight. Percy and I were standing up by the duty desk watching this. Percy with his arm folded and a small, contemptuous smile on his lips. After a bit, he took out his horn comb and went to work on his hair with it. John Coffey was watching too, standing silently at the bars of his cell. Wharton was lying on his bunk, staring up at the ceiling and ignoring the whole show. He was still being good, although what he called good was what the doctor at Briar Ridge called catatonic. And there was one other person there as well. He was tucked out of sight in my office, but his skinny shadow fell out the door onto the Green Mile. What this you gone for? Del asked querulously, drawing his feet up on the bunk as Brutal undid the double locks on his cell door and ran it open. His eyes flicked back and forth like at the three of them. Well, I'll tell you, Brutal said. Mr. Morris is gone for a while. His wife is under the weather, as you may have heard. So Mr. Anderson is in charge. Mr. Curtis Anderson. Yeah? What they got to do with me? Well, Harry said, Boss Anderson's heard about your mouse, Del, and wants to see him perform. He and about 6 other fellows are over in admin, just waiting for you to show up. Not just plain old blue suit guards either. These are pretty big bugs, just like Brute said. One of them, I believe, is a politician all the way from the state capitol. Delacroix swelled visibly at this, and I saw not so much as a single shred of doubt on his face. Of course they wanted to see Mr. Jingles. Who would not? He scrummed around, first under his bunk and then under his pillow. He eventually found one of those big pink peppermints and a wildly colored spool. He looked at Brutal questioningly, and Brutal nodded. Yep, it's the spool trick they really wild to see, I guess. But the way he eats those mints is pretty damn cute, too. And don't forget the cigar box. You want to carry him in, right? Delacroix got the box and put Mr. Jingles' props in it. But Mouse he settled on his shoulder of his shirt. Then he stepped out of his cell, his puffed out chest leading the way, and regarded Dean and Harry. You boys coming? No, Dean said. Got other fish to fry, but you knock him for a loop, Del. Show him what happens when the Louisiana boy puts the hammer down and really goes to work. You bet. A smile shone out of his face, so sudden and so simple in his happiness that I felt my heart break for him a little, in spite of the terrible thing he had done. What a world we live in, what a world. Delacroix turned to John Coffey, with whom he had struck up a different friendship, but not much different from 100 other death house acquaintances I've seen. You knock him for a loop, Del, Coffey said in a serious voice. You show him all his tricks. Delacroix nodded and held his hand up by his shoulder. Mr. Jingles stepped onto it like it was a platform, and Delacroix held the hand out toward Coffey's cell. John Coffey stuck out a huge finger, and I'll be damned if that mouse didn't stretch out his neck and lick the end of it, just like a dog. Come on, Del, quit lingering, Brutal said. These folks are setting back a hot dinner at home to watch your mouse cut his capers. Not true, of course. Anderson would have been there until 8 o'clock on any night, and the guards he dragged in to watch Delacroix's show will be there until 11 or 12, depending on when their shifts were scheduled in. The politician from the state capitol will most likely turn out to be an office janitor in a borrowed tie, but Delacroix had no way of knowing any of that. I'm ready, Delacroix said, speaking with the simplicity of a great star, but somehow managed to retain the common touch. Let's go. And as Brutal led him up the Green Mile with Mr. Jingles perched there on the little man's shoulder, Delacroix once more began to bugle, Messieurs et Mesdames, bienvenue à Circuit de Musique. Yet, even lost as deeply in his own fantasy world as he was, he gave Percy a wide berth and a mistrustful glance. Harry and Dean stopped in front of the empty cell across from Wharton's. That worthy had still not so much as stirred. They watched as Brutal unlocked the door to the exercise yard, where another 2 guards were waiting to join him, and led Delacroix out, bound for his command performance before the grand high poobahs of Cold Mountain Penitentiary. We waited until the door was locked again, and then I looked toward my office. That shadow was still lying on the floor, thin as famine, and I was glad Delacroix had been too excited to see it. Come on out, I said, and let's move along brisk, folks. I want to get 2 run-throughs in, and we don't have much time. Old Toot Toot, looking as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as ever, came out, walked to Delacroix's cell, and strolled in through the open door. Sitting down, he said. I'm sitting down, I'm sitting down, I'm sitting down. This is the real circus, I thought, closing my eyes for a second. This is the real circus right here. We're all just a bunch of trained mice. Then I put the thought out of my mind, and we started to rehearse. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. The first rehearsal went well, and so did the second. Percy performed better than I could have hoped for in my wildest dreams. That didn't mean things would go right when the time really came for the occasion to walk the mile, but it was a big step in the right direction. It occurred to me that it had gone well because Percy was at long last doing something he cared about. I felt a surge of contempt at that and pushed it away. What did it matter? He would cap Delacroix and Roland, and then both of them would be gone. If that wasn't a happy ending, what was? And, as Morris pointed out, Delacroix's nuts were going to fry no matter who was out front. Still, Percy had shown to good advantage in his new role, and he knew it. We all did. As for me, I was too relieved to dislike him much, at least for the time being. It looked as if things were going to go all right. I was further relieved to find that Percy actually listened when we suggested some things he could do that might improve his performance even more, or at least cut down the possibility of something going wrong. If you want to know the truth, we got pretty enthusiastic about it. Even Dean, who ordinarily stood well back from Percy, physically as well as mentally if he could. None of it that surprising either, I suppose. For most men, nothing is more flattering than having a young person actually pay attention to his advice, and we were no different in that regard. As a result, not a one of us noticed that Wild Bill Wharton was no longer looking up at the ceiling. That includes me, but I know he wasn't. He was looking at us as we stood there by the duty desk, gasping and giving Percy advice, giving him advice, and him pretending to listen. Quite a laugh considering how things turned out. The sound of a key rattling into the lock of the door to the exercise yard put an end to our little post-rehearsal critique. Dean gave Percy a warning glance. Not a word or a wrong look, he said. We don't want them to know what we've been doing. It's not good for them. Upsets them. Percy nodded and ran a finger across his lips in a mum's the word gesture that was supposed to be funny and wasn't. The exercise yard door opened and Delacroix came in, escorted by Brutal, who was carrying a cigar box with the colored spool in it, the way the magician's assistant in a vaudeville show might carry the boss's props off stage at the end of the act. Mr. Jingles was perched on Delacroix's shoulder. And Delacroix himself? I tell you what, Lily Langtry couldn't have looked any glowier after performing at the White House. They love Mr. Jingles, Delacroix proclaimed. They laugh and cheer and they clap their hands. Well, that's aces, Percy said. He spoke in an indulgent, proprietary way that didn't sound like the old Percy at all. Pop on back in your cell, old timer. Delacroix gave him a comical look of distrust, and the old Percy came bursting out. He bared his teeth in a mock snarl and made as if to grab Delacroix. It was a joke, of course. Percy was happy, not in a serious grabbing mood at all. But Delacroix didn't know that. He jerked away with an expression of fear and dismay and tripped over one of Brutal's big feet. He went down hard, hitting the linoleum with the back of his head. Mr. Jingles leaped away in time to avoid being crushed and went squeaking off down the Green Mile to Delacroix's cell. Delacroix got to his feet, gave the chuckling Percy a single hate-filled glance, then scurried off after his pet, calling for him and rubbing the back of his head. Brutal, who didn't know that Percy had shown exciting signs of competency for a change, gave Percy a wordless look of contempt and went after Del, shaking his keys out. I think what happened next happened because Percy was actually moved to apologize. I know it's hard to believe, but he was in extraordinary humor that day. If true, it only proves a cynical old adage I heard once. Something about how no good deed goes unpunished. Remember me telling you about how, after he chased the mouse down to the restraint room, one of those 2 occasions before Delacroix joined us, Percy got a little too close to the Prez's cell? Doing that was dangerous, which was why the Green Mile was so wide. When you walked straight down the middle of it, you couldn't be reached from the cells. The Prez hadn't done anything to Percy, but I remember thinking that Arlen Bitterbuck might have. Had it been him Percy had gotten too close to, just to teach him a lesson. Well, the Prez and the Chief had both moved on, but Wild Bill Wharton had taken their place. He was worse mannered than the Prez or the Chief had ever dreamed of being, and he'd been watching the whole little play, hoping for a chance to get on stage himself. That chance now fell into his lap, courtesy of Percy Wetmore. "Hey, Del," Percy called, half laughing, starting after Brutal and Delacroix, and drifting much too close to Wharton's side of the Green Mile without realizing it. "Hey, you numb shit. I didn't mean nothing by it. Are you all right?" Wharton was up off his buck and over to the bars of his cell in a flash. Never in my time as a guard did I see anyone move so fast, and that includes some of the athletic young men Brutal and I worked with later at Boys Correction. He shot his arms out through the bars and grabbed Percy, first by the shoulders of his uniform blouse and then by the throat. Wharton dragged him back against his cell door. Percy squealed like a pig in a slaughter chute, and I saw from his eyes that he thought he was going to die. "Ain't you sweet," Wharton whispered. One hand left Percy's throat and ruffled through his hair. "Soft," he said, half laughing. "Like a girl's. I'd rather fuck your asshole than your sister's pussy, I think." And he actually kissed Percy's ear. I think Percy, who had beat Delacroix into the block for accidentally brunching his crop, knew exactly what was happening. I doubt that he wanted to, but I think he did. All the color had drained from his face, and the blemishes on his cheeks stood out like birthmarks. His eyes were huge and wet. A line of spittle leaked from one corner of his twitching mouth. All this happened quick. It was begun and done in less than 10 seconds, I'd say. Harry and I stepped forwards, our billies raised. Dean drew his gun. But before things would go so much as an inch further, Wharton let go of Percy and stepped back, raising his hands to his shoulders and grinning his grank grin. "I let him go. I was just playing and I let him go," he said. "Never hurt Harry a single hair on that boy's pretty head. So don't you go sticking me down in that goddamn soft room again." Percy Wetmore darted across the Green Mile and cringed against the barred door of the empty cell on the other side, breathing so fast and so loud that it sounded almost like sobbing. He had finally gotten his lesson in keeping it to the center of the Green Mile and away from the fruminous bandersnatch, the teeth that bite and the claws that catch. Had an idea it was a lesson that would stick with him longer than all the advice we'd given him after our rehearsals. There was an expression of utter terror in his face, and his precious hair was seriously mussed up for the first time since I'd met him, all in spikes and tangles. He looked like someone who had just escaped being raped. There was a moment of utter stop then, a quiet so thick that the only sound was the sobbing whistle of Percy's breathing. What broke it was cackling laughter, so sudden and so completely in its own mad thing that it was shocking. Wharton was my first thought, but it wasn't him. It was Delacroix, standing in the open door of his cell and pointing at Percy. The mouse was back on his shoulder, and Delacroix looked like a small but malevolent male witch, complete with imp. "Look at him! He done pissed his pants," Delacroix howled. "Look at what the big man done. Busting other people with his stick. Maybe we saw him way home, but when someone touched him, he made water in his pants just like a baby. He laughed and pointed, all his fear and hatred of Percy coming out in that derisive laughter. Percy stared at him, seemingly incapable of moving or speaking. Warden stepped back to the bars of his cell, looked down at the dark spots on the front of Percy's trousers. It was small, but it was there, and no question about what it was, and grinned. Somebody ought to buy the tough boy a ditty, he said, and went back to his bunk, chuffing laughter. Brutal went down to Delacroix's cell, but the Cajun had ducked inside and thrown himself on his bunk before Brutal could get there. I reached out and grasped Percy's shoulder. Percy, I began. But that was as far as I got. He came to life, shaking my hand off. He looked down at the front of his pants, saw the spot spreading there, and blushed a dark, fiery red. He looked up at me again, then at Harry and Dean. I remember being glad that old Toot Toot was gone. If he'd been around, the story would have been all over prison in a single day. And, given Percy's last name, an unfortunate one in this context, it was a story that would have been told with the relish of high glee for years to come. You talk about this to anyone, and you'll all be on the breadlines in a week, he whispered fiercely. It was the sort of crack that would have made me want to swat him under the circumstances. But under these, I only pitied him. Under other circumstances. But under these, I only pitied him. I think he saw that pity, and it made it worse with him, like having an open wound scoured with nettles. What goes on here stays here, Dean said quietly. You don't have to worry about that. Percy looked back over his shoulder toward Delacroix's cell. Brutal was just locking the door, and from inside, deadly clear, we could still hear Delacroix giggling. Percy's look was as black as thunder. I thought of telling him that you reap what you sowed in this life, and then decided this might not be the right time for a scripture lesson. As for him, he began, but never finished. He left instead, head down, to go into the storage room and look for a pair of dry pants. He's so purty, Warden said in a dreamy voice. Harry told him to shut the fuck up before he went down to the restraint room just on general damn principles. Warden folded his arm to his chest, closed his eyes, and appeared to go to sleep. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9. The night before Delacroix's execution came down hotter and muggier than ever. 81 degrees by the thermometer outside the admin ready room window when I clocked it in 6. 81 degrees at the end of October. Think of that. And thunder rumbling in the west like it does in July. I met a member of my congregation in town that afternoon, and he had asked me with apparent seriousness if I thought such unseasonable weather could be a sign of the last times. I said that I was sure not, but it crossed my mind that it was the last times for Edward Delacroix. All right, yes, indeed it was. Bill Dobbs was standing in the door to the exercise yard, drinking coffee and smoking him a little smoke. He looked around at me and said, well, look at there. Paul Edgecombe, big as life and twice as ugly. How'd the day go, Billy? All right. Delacroix? Fine. He seems to understand it's tomorrow, yet it's like he don't understand. You know how most of them are when the end finally comes for them? I nodded. Warden? Bill laughed. What a comedian. Makes Jack Benny sound like a Quaker. He told Rolf Wettermark that he ate strawberry jam out of his wife's pussy. What did Rolf say? That he wasn't married. Said it must have been his mother Warden was thinking of. I laughed, and hard. That really was funny in a low sort of way. And it was good just to be able to laugh without feeling like someone was lighting matches way down low in my gut. Bill laughed with me, then turned the rest of his coffee on the yard, which was empty except for a few shuffling trustees, most of whom had been there for 1,000 years or so. Thunder rumbled somewhere far off, and unfocused heat lightning flashed in the darkening sky overhead. Bill looked up uneasily, his laughter dying. I tell you what, though, he said, I don't like this weather much. Feels like something's going to happen. Something bad. About that, he was right. The bad thing happened right around 9:45 that night. That was when Percy killed Mr. Jingles. At first, it seems like we were going to be a pretty good night in spite of the heat. John Coffey was being his usual quiet self, while Bill was making out to be Miles Bill, and Delacroix was in good spirits for a man who had a date with old Sparky in a little more than 24 hours. He did understand what was going to happen to him, at least on the most basic level. He had ordered chili for his last meal. He gave me special instructions for the kitchen. Tell him to lay on that hot sauce, he said. Tell him kind that really jump up your throat and say howdy. The green stuff. None of that mild. That stuff gripe me like a motherfucker and I can't get off the toilet the next day. But I don't think I'm going to have a problem this time, Miss Pop. Most of them worry about their immortal souls with a kind of moronic ferocity. but Delacroix pretty much dismissed my question about what he wanted for spiritual comfort in his last hours. If that fella Schuster had been good enough for Big Chief Bitterbuck, Del reckoned, Schuster would be good enough for him. No, what he cared about, you've guessed already, I'm sure, was what was going to happen to Mr. Jingles after he, Delacroix, passed on. I was used to spending long hours with the condemned on the night before their last march, but this was the first time I spent those long hours pondering the fate of a mouse. Del considered scenario after scenario, patiently working the possibilities through his dim mind. And while he thought aloud, when he provided for his pet's mouse future as for a child that had to be put through college, he threw that color spool against the wall. Each time he did it, Mr. Jingles would spring after it, track it down, and then roll it back to Del's foot. It started to get on my nerves after a while. First the check of the spool against the stone wall, then the minute clatter of Jingles' paws. Although it was a cute trick, it pawed after 90 minutes or so, and Mr. Jingles never seemed to get tired. He paused every now and then to refresh himself with a drink of water out of a coffee saucer Delacroix kept for just that purpose, ordered once a pink crumb of peppermint candy, and then back to it he went. Several times it was up on the tip of my tongue to tell Delacroix to give it a rest, and each time I reminded myself that he had this night and tomorrow to play the spool game with the Jingles, and that was all. Near the end, though, it began to be really difficult to hold on to that thought. You know how it is with a noise that's repeated over and over. After a while, it shoots your nerves. I started to speak after all. Then something made me look over my shoulder and out the cell door. John Coffey was standing at his cell door across the way, and he shook his head at me, right, left, back to center. As if he really had read my mind, it was telling me to think again. I would see that Mr. Jingles go to Miss Delacroix's maiden aunt, I said, the one who had sent him in the big bag of candy. His colored spool will go as well, even just house. We take up a collection and see that Toot gave up his claim on the Corona box. No, said Delacroix after some consideration. He had time to throw the spool against the wall at least 5 times, with Mr. Jingles either nosing it back or pushing it with his paws. That wouldn't do. Aunt Hermione was too old. She wouldn't understand Mrs. Jingles' frisky ways. And suppose Mr. Jingles outlived her. What would happen to him then? No, Aunt Hermione just wouldn't do. Well then, I asked, suppose one of us took it. One of us guards. Wait. We could keep him right there on E-Block. No, Delacroix said. He thanked me kindly for the thought. Certainement. But Mr. Jingles was a mouse that yearned to be free. He, Edward Delacroix, knew this. Because Mr. Jingles had, you guessed it, whispered the information in his ear. Yes.
A pocket.
Okay. All right, I said. One of us will take him home. Del. Dean, maybe. He's got a little boy that would just love a pet mouse, I bet.
Hey, Mom.
Delacroix actually turned pale with the horror at the thought. A little kid in charge of a rodent genius like Mr. Jingles? How in the name of Limbo and Dew could a little kid be expected to keep up with his training, let alone teach him new tricks? And suppose the kid lost interest and forgot to feed him for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. Delacroix had roasted 6 human beings alive in an effort to cover up his original crime, shuddered with the delicate revulsion of an ardent anti-vivisection. All right, I said. I'll take him myself. Promise him anything, remember, in the last 48 hours. Promise him anything. How would that be? No, sir, Boss Edgecombe, Del said apologetically. He threw the spool again. It hit the wall, bounced, spun. Then Mr. Jingles was on it like white on rice and nosing it back to Delacroix. Thank you kindly, Missy beaucoup. But you live out in the woods, and Mr. Jingles be scared to live out dans le forêt. I know because I think I can guess how you know, Del, I said. Delacroix nodded, smiling. But we're going to figure this out, you bet. He threw the spool. Mr. Jingles cleared after it. I tried not to wince. In the end, it was Brutal who saved the day. He had been up by the duty desk watching Dean and Harry play cribbage. Percy was there too. Brutal finally tired of trying to start a conversation with me, getting nothing but sullen grunts in response. He strolled down to where I sat on a stool outside of Delacroix's cell and stood there listening to us with his arm folded. How about Mouseville? Brutal asked, into the considering silence which followed Del's rejection of my spooky old house out in the woods. He threw the comment out in a casual, just an idea tone of voice. Mouseville? Delacroix asked, giving Brutal a look both startled and interested. What's Mouseville? It's this tourist attraction down in Florida, he said. Tallahassee, I think. Is that right, Paul? Tallahassee? Yep, I said, speaking without a moment's hesitation, thinking God bless Brutus Howell. Tallahassee, right down the road a piece from the Dog University.
Daddy?
Brutal's mouth twisted
Daddy?
that, and I thought he was going to queer the pitch by laughing.
Daddy.
But he got it under control and
Daddy.
nodded. I'd hear about the dog
Daddy.
university later, though, I imagine.
Is he dead?
Not yet. Wait.
Is he dead?
Wait a minute. This time, Dell didn't throw the spool, although Mr. Jingles stood on Dell's slipper with his front paws raised, clearly lusting for another chance to chase. The Cajun looked from Brutal to me and back to Brutal again. What they do in Mouseville, he asked. You think they'd take Mr. Jingles? Brutal asked me, simultaneously ignoring Dell and drawing him on. Think he's got the stuff, Paul? I tried to appear considering. You know, I said, the more I think of it, the more it seems like a brilliant idea. From the corner of my eye, I saw Percy come partway down the Green Mile, giving Wharton's cell a very wide berth. He stood with one shoulder leaning against an empty cell, listening with a small, contemptuous smile on his lips. What this Mouseville? Dell asked, now frantic to know. A tourist attraction, like I told you, Brutal said. There's, 100 or so mice there. Wouldn't you say, Paul? More like 150 these days, I said. It's a big success. I understand they're thinking of opening one out in California and calling it Mouseville West. That's how much business is booming. Trained mice are the common thing with the smart set, I guess. I don't understand it myself. Dell sat with the colored spool in his hand, looking at us, his own situation forgotten for the time being. They only take the smartest mice, Brutal cautioned, the ones that can do tricks. And they can't be white mice, because those are pet shop mice. Pet shop mice, yeah, you bet, Delacroix said fiercely. I hate them pet shop mice. And what they got, Brutal said, his eyes distant now as he imagined it, is this tent you go into? Yeah, like in the cirque. Do you got to pay to get in? You shitting me? Of course you got to pay to get in. $1 a piece, 2 cents for the kiddies. And there's like this whole city made out of bake-like boxes and toilet paper rolls with windows made out of isinglass so you can see what they're up to in there. Yeah. Delacroix was in the ecstasy now. Then he turned to me. What's ivy glass? Like on the front of a stove where you can see in, I said. Oh, sure, that shit. He cranked his hand at Brutal, wanted him to go on, and Mr. Jingles' little oil-dropped eyes practically spun in their sockets, trying to keep that spool in view. It was pretty funny. Percy came a little closer, as if wanting to get a better look, and I saw John Coffey frowning at him, but I was too wrapped up in Brutal's fantasy to pay much attention. This took telling the condemned man what he wanted to hear to new heights, and I was all admiration, believe me. Well, Brutal said, there's the Mouse City. What the kids really like is the Mouseville All-Star Circus, where there's mice that swing on trapezes, and mice that roll these little barrels, and mice that stack coins. Yeah, that's it. That's the place, Mr. Jingles, Delacroix said. His eyes sparked and his cheeks were high with color. It occurred to me that Brutus Howell was a kind of saint. You're going to be a circus mouse after all, Mr. Jingles. Going to live in a mouse city down in Florida. All ivy glass windows. Hoorah! He threw the spool extra hard. It hit low on the wall, took a crazy bounce, and squirted out between the bars of the cell door and onto the mile. Mr. Jingles raced out after it, and Percy saw his chance. No, you fool, Brutal yelled, but Percy paid no attention. Just as Mr. Jingles reached the spool, too intent on it to realize his old enemy was at hand, Percy brought the sole of one hard black work shoe down on it. There was an audible snap as Mr. Jingles' back broke, and blood gushed from his mouth. His tiny dark eyes bulged in their sockets, and ended in my read an expression of surprised agony that was all too human. Delacroix screamed with horror and grief. He threw himself at the door of his cell and thrust his arms out between the bars, reaching as far as he could, crying the mouse's name over and over. Percy turned toward him, smiling toward the three of us. There, he said. I knew I'd get him sooner or later. Just a matter of time, really. He turned and walked back up the Green Mile, not hurrying, leaving Mr. Jingles lying on the linoleum in a spreading pool of his own blood. That is the end of Book 3, The Green Mile, Coffey's Hands. Don't forget, at this point, you should be finished compiling the information that you need in order to decide who's more dangerous, Wild Bill Wharton or Percy Wetmore.